Ready? Oh. Okay, we're going to move to our second briefing topic for today, dealing with Chesapeake Bay restoration. We've got 3 separate panels, and then after the 3 panels, we'll move to some bill hearings on a bunch of environmental bills. So we're going to start with the Chesapeake Bay Commission. We've got Anna Killius and Mark Kaufman. Who else do we have up here? I think we got a separate panel. Are we consolidating?
So the presentation is the only thing that's consolidated.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, Allison Colden and Matt Stegman. Well, okay, so we've got 2 of our 3 panels now up here. Okay, why don't we start with the Chesapeake Bay Commission? Is that whose slide we have?
Yes.
Okay, we'll start with you. Whichever one of the 2 of you want to start. Go on. Okay.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to join you today to give an update on the Chesapeake Bay restoration effort. My name is Anna Killius. I'm the Executive Director of the Chesapeake Bay Commission, and I'm joined by our Maryland Director, Mark Hoffman. This is actually Mark's last Bay briefing with you all. He will be retiring at the end of next month, so I hope you'll join me in thanking him for well over 30 years of service to Maryland, both at DNR and with the Commission. We are going to miss him. So, a quick reminder. Oh, there we go. Hopefully I didn't. A quick reminder of who we are at the Chesapeake Bay Commission. We were initially created in 1980 by Maryland and Virginia in recognition of the important role that the state legislators were going to need to play in the restoration of the Chesapeake Bay. Pennsylvania joined in 1985. We have 21 commission members, 7 of those from each state, 5 of which are state legislators, 2 senators, 3 members of the House. Here in Maryland, Senator Sarah Love is the chair of the Maryland delegation. She is joined by Senator Mary Washington. And in the House, we have Delegate Dana Stein, who is the vice chair, joined by delegates Julian Ivey and Sheila Ruth. Our mission is threefold: to promote science-based policy in each of our 3 states, to advance the health of the Bay, to serve as the legislative voice when it comes to the Chesapeake Bay program as a signatory of the watershed agreement, and then to actively engage Congress on issues of federal policy and budget when it comes to the needs of the Bay. So I believe that any good presentation starts by telling the audience what you're going to tell them, then telling them, and then tell them what you already told them. So here's the bottom line up front, right? The key takeaways from today. We are marking 40 years of progress through partnership, guided by the Watershed Agreement. And at this moment of time, it is important that we recognize the progress we've made, the challenges in front of us, and strategize for the future of that partnership. Second, the Bay Commission and Maryland are going to continue to need to be important leaders at this very pivotal moment. We are going to need to emphasize a few principles that have always been at the core of our success and our longevity as a partnership, and that is state-led, bipartisan collaboration when it comes to the Bay. So this is the rest of what I plan to tell you. I'll start by setting the stage with some of the background about the Bay program and where we are in our restoration work. I'll share a bit about the process we're in right now to plan the future of that partnership beyond the year 2025. And then I'll touch on some of the recent progress that we have made in our states when it comes to restoration through bipartisan collaboration. So setting the stage. This is the Chesapeake Bay program. This is who I refer to when I say the program. It is made up of all 9 signatories of the Watershed Agreement, the 6 watershed states, the District of Columbia, EPA on behalf of all of the participating federal agencies, and the Chesapeake Bay Commission. Our names are on the line of that agreement. We are on the hook. We help decide the course of that program through the Executive Council. The partnership behind that program is much broader. It includes all of the nonprofits, the research institutions, the private industry, and private individuals that are making this work churn. I won't go through the whole brief history of the Bay program, but it is 40 years of partnership. It begins with an acknowledgement that we were seeing a rapid loss of aquatic life in the Bay, an acknowledgement that water quality was a major contributor to that, and that it was going to take all of the states within the watershed working together to get a handle on that and to improve water quality, to improve aquatic life, and ultimately improve the well-being of the communities throughout our watershed. We are in the fourth iteration of the Chesapeake Bay Watershed Agreement right now, and this is a snapshot of what that agreement includes. Is one vision commonly held by all signatories, 10 goals, and 31 time-bound measurable targets. You'll see that those goals are a rather holistic, comprehensive idea of what a healthy watershed looks like. Everything from clean water to sustainable fisheries to environmentally literate children ready to take on as stewards of the future. The outcomes are the specific targets that we aim towards as a partnership to move these goals forward, to achieve these goals together. And we are making meaningful progress. You hear a lot about where we're falling short, but I think we should acknowledge what we have managed to do together as a partnership. We saw the smallest dead zone on record observed in the Chesapeake Bay in 2023. We have over 1.6 million acres of land that has been permanently protected since 2011. And here in Maryland, you've already hit your more aggressive goal of 30% by 2030, 6 years ahead of time. We've seen 3 consecutive years of improvement to our underwater grasses. We've taken on the largest oyster restoration effort in the world, and we're on time to accomplishing that by the deadlines we set. Forest buffers, you'll see, is one of our major challenges. This is an area where we continue to lose acreage faster than we can plant new trees. But in 2023, we got a major boost because our partners installed over 640 miles of forested buffers, the highest number since 2016. It is not all good news. When we look across all of those outcomes, we know that 18 are on course to be completed or are already completed by 2025. 13 are off course or uncertain. So that brings me to the moment that we're in right now as a program. You may have heard reference to beyond 2025, and where is the Bay program and the Bay restoration effort going to go beyond 2025? So a little bit about why there's so much attention on this year and what comes after. When you look across those outcomes, the year 2025 is a key target date. You can think of it as a deadline, but not a finish line. For example, by the end of 2025, the jurisdictions are supposed to have all practices in place that are necessary to meet the Chesapeake Bay total maximum daily load. By 2025, we aimed to restore historical fish migration routes by opening 132 additional miles of passage every 2 years. And by 2025, we wanted to add 85,000 acres of new or reestablished wetlands and enhance 150,000 acres of degraded wetlands. So now that we're in 2025, we face the question of what comes next. For outcomes that we are on track or have already met, like fish passage, we need to ask, is there a new target that we're aiming for? For outcomes that we haven't met, like the watershed implementation plan, we need to decide, is there a new deadline, or do we need to fundamentally rethink how we are aiming to meet these targets? So we need a plan for the future of the partnership beyond this key deadline. And that is what we are, as a program, working towards right now. In 2022, the Executive Council, all of those signatories, they charged the Bay program to recommend a plan for the future, to chart a course beyond this year. And over the past year or so, a steering committee drawn from across that partnership has been thinking critically about how to strategize for the future. Basically, that strategy comes down to the 2 core components in front of you: what we do and how we work together. The what we do is the goals and outcomes in that agreement, and the how we work together is the structure and organization of the partnership, how we make decisions, how we meet each other, who's in the room, and when. And that steering committee recommended the following. So when it comes to the agreement, affirm, continue, and amend. Affirm our continuing commitment to partnership. In essence, 2025 is a deadline, not a finish line. The watershed agreement doesn't end in 2025. We need to figure out the future together. Continue to make progress under that agreement. So we're not letting our feet off the pedal right now. We are continuing to implement the plans in place, even as we strategize for the future. And then amend the existing agreement. We are not writing a new one. We are amending the current one. We are bringing it up to modern times to make sure that it gives us the guidance we need to move forward. And then finally, on the structure, we are strong, but we could simplify and streamline to make sure that we are more inclusive and engaging in the work that we do.
We'll take questions when you're done.
Okay. So based on those recommendations from that steering committee, the Executive Council has further charged the program when they met this past December. By the end of this year, we are preparing revisions to the watershed agreement. We are primarily focused on those outcomes, those time-bound specific targets. And as we prepare those revisions, we are considering a couple of things: engaging all communities, addressing water quality and living resources, elevating conservation, and using the latest science when we do that. And then when it comes to our structure, we have about 18 months to work on that. We are simplifying and streamlining with the goal of being more inclusive of all communities and more manageable for people who participate in the work. This is a phenomenal amount of work to be done in the next 12 to 18 months. It's going to have real impacts on how we focus our time and our resources as a program in the future. But it is really critical that we take this moment to modernize and adapt, to take stock of everything we've learned over the last 10 years, to take stock of the new and emerging challenges we are facing as a partnership, and to think strategically about how we do more for our waterways, for our living resources, and for our communities. So, like I said, we are doing all of this. We are making the turn. We are redirecting the ship at the same time as we are, fully on board with pushing as far as we can, even on the meantime, on everything we've already said we would do. If you listened in on the Executive Council meeting in December, the unofficial theme that you would have heard across the board when it came to the governors of Maryland, Virginia, and Pennsylvania was, we are all in. We are committed to this partnership, to meeting the shared goals that we have set, and they had significant progress to report when they said that. So in Pennsylvania, that is our largest landholder in the Chesapeake Bay. They have 85,000 miles of rivers and streams. That is the densest in any state in the United States. That is quite the challenge that they have, but they know that the more they do for the Bay, the more they do for their local waterways. It is intrinsically linked. The latest report card from the University of Maryland reports that the Upper Bay received one of the highest scores and is showing the most improvement across all regions of the Bay. And over the last 5 years, Pennsylvania agriculture has made 5 times the nutrient reductions in the Chesapeake Bay as it did the previous 10 years. So just to repeat that, in 5 years, they've done 5 times the work that they did in the previous 10 years. They started up a new cost share program for their agriculture sector, and they are now funding it with both federal and state dollars. There's really a new sense of ownership that you can hear in the administration and the legislature when it comes to Pennsylvania. In Virginia, we have a very strong relationship with Governor Youngkin and his Secretary of Natural and Historic Resources, Travis Voiles. And under their watch, Virginia has fully funded their agriculture cost share program at record levels. Last week, Secretary Voiles announced that he was leaving the Youngkin administration to serve as the Assistant Deputy Administrator at EPA. And that's a pretty significant deal for us, because having a former commission member and colleague at EPA during this transition is going to be critical. We will need EPA's continued leadership and support of the Bay program, and Mr. Voiles has been part of the Bay program and part of these decisions over the past couple of years, so he knows the moment that we're in and how pivotal it is. I'll leave you with this. This is a snapshot of what the commission has accomplished in 1 year when it comes to all 3 of our states, as well as our work at in Washington, D.C. when it comes to federal policy. In Pennsylvania, $50 million per year in dedicated state funding for their Clean Streams Fund. In Virginia, record funding for that ag cost share program, and a new pay for outcomes program that it was largely modeled by looking at Maryland's. In Maryland, the whole Watershed Act, as well as some updates to your Clean Water Commerce Act and PFAS. In Washington, D.C., we reauthorized the Chesapeake Bay Program Office at EPA. We were successful in getting some additional stormwater authorities in the National Defense Authorization Act, and we continue to work on fiscal year 2025 appropriations as well as the Farm Bill. So just to tell you what I already told you, we have made a lot of progress. We have a lot of work to do. We are strategizing the future of the Bay program as we speak, refreshing our targets and streamlining our structure. We're not pressing pause as we do this. We are still fully committed to doing the work on the plans that we have already in place. And then at the very beginning of the Bay restoration, it has always been a state-led, federally supported collaboration that reaches across jurisdictions and party lines. That is what gives us the longevity and the success that we have. It's what's going to continue our success in the future, despite the headwinds in front of us. So thank you.
Okay, Mr. Hoffman, are you just here for questions? Yes, okay, we'll take some questions. We're going to start with Vice Chair Kagan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you both. Thank you to your whole team. Thank you to everybody who's here. You don't have page numbers on your PowerPoint, so maybe, Lemoria, if you can possibly, or someone can scroll back to this page.
The outcomes page.
So I'm going to assume that this is more than 15 minutes old, and so I have to ask about the elephant in the room, which is, what are we looking at from the new administration? How is that going to affect your plans? What's on course? What's off course? What's the worst and possibly best case scenario that we can expect from the, as I call it, Trump-Musk administration?
So the outcome status, that is the product of all of the efforts of the partnership. So the states, the federal government, all of the different partners, the NGOs, the public and private entities. I think it's too soon to know exactly how the federal administration change is going to impact the individual progress across any of those outcomes. But we do know kind of what we were working with under the previous Trump administration when it came to the Bay program, and I think we're kind of refreshing our playbook from that administration to work with them again.
Let's hope it's similar and not radically worse. So thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, we're going to go to Senator Hester, then Senator Washington.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the great presentation. Always good to see you guys here. My question was about a presentation I have on my desk that I don't think that we went through, the Chesapeake Bay restoration. This one?
That's going to be, that's another
That's coming
panel.
up. Ah, thank you.
Okay, Senator Washington.
Never mind. Okay, thanks. Thank you, and thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, it is absolutely an honor to serve on this commission, and what a great experience. It's truly bipartisan, Pennsylvania making amazing progress and moving forward in Virginia and Maryland. And going forward, I'd like you to just fill in a little bit around some of the discussion around just where we need to move forward in terms of climate adaptation, wetlands, healthy watersheds. You know I have the interest in floodwaters. Sort of, what are some of the things that we're starting to think about, or some of the members are talking about in terms of how we would view the responsibility of what could it be included in a future agreement?
Unfortunately, it's a little too early to really forecast how all of those outcomes, the subject matter experts behind those outcomes, which way they're leaning in terms of what the future holds. We've asked them to really provide us an early answer to that, basically throughout February and March. So over the course of the next 2 months, they're going to be telling us their best advice about what to do with the future of that outcome. And then the Bay program, all of the decision makers will sit with that advice and decide if we agree or if we have a different idea of how we want to move through the future. I think when it comes to climate, we've heard a lot about the importance of each of our outcomes considering how climate is going to impact our success and how each of the work that we do on those outcomes can plan for that, can mitigate against future impacts. So that one is really going to be kind of across the board. How can everyone be considering this in the future? And then with some of the other outcomes like wetlands or forested buffers and tree canopy, those are places where we're losing acreage because of all kinds of different factors of change. And we really need to think critically about what is what is as my predecessor would say, the outer edge of possible? What is that ambitious thing that we can strive for, but is still realistic when we look at how change is kind of impacting us over time? So we may see some larger changes there.
Okay. If I could just follow up, just for clarity, and it's also the benefit, we have new members, not just our newest member, but we have new members, and talking about the bay and the restoration work. And I like the slide about where we've been on course, but then the portion of the slide that talks about the off course, and why I asked about forest buffers and wetlands and healthy watersheds and climate adaptation. And so the important thing here, you're saying, is for us to use science, for one, but could you perhaps share, and I think this is sort of what some states are doing. In other words, I think at the last meeting, there was a sharing of how Pennsylvania really focuses on some of its smaller streams and tributaries in terms of how it talks about the bay and how it does the interventions versus looking at just the bay as this one place between Maryland and Virginia, but everything that goes into it.
Sure, you've hit upon what is another theme of the moment as we strategize for the future, which is providing local benefits. So even as we work towards improving the bay itself, we should be focusing on providing local benefits throughout the watershed to the communities that actually are doing the work and should experience the benefit of their actions. And in places like Pennsylvania, where they've identified particular watersheds or streams that they want to target and kind of focus their efforts in a very specific way to remove those streams from the list of impaired streams. They've had some success. This past year, they delisted 4 of their impaired streams, and Maryland is now, with the whole Watersheds Act, kind of taking from that example to see if we can identify those places where we can really, in a targeted way, remove areas from the impaired list and get those benefits felt locally on the way to the larger goal.
Okay, Senator Carosa, why don't you have the last word for this panel?
Thank you, and I will ask this question of the state panel, but I wanted to give with the expertise of the Chesapeake Bay Commission, I thank you for your service. One area that where there have been significant federal and state investments in the past, where we're not seeing results, are the oyster sanctuaries. You may or may not be aware, but the Talbot Watermen's Association in great detail reviewed and analyzed the Maryland oyster sanctuaries. If the report that DNR put together in 2021, and the bottom line is that the large majority of the 51 sanctuaries have failed across the board. And the concern is the public's not aware that I think they've made an assumption that from 2010 to 2020, there has been this repopulating of the bay with oysters. But when you go down line by line on the individual sanctuaries, those facts don't pan out. My question is, with your expertise, if you are involved or would have an opinion of Maryland considering new standards in actually evaluating the oyster sanctuaries, so we change this reality that 48 of the 51 are dead or dying.
I'm afraid I don't have an opinion. I would feel ill-equipped to provide one. When I spoke of the oyster outcome, that was very specific to the target that was set by the program, which was the 10 tributaries that had been selected for work, not a reflection of Maryland's assessment of its own sanctuaries broadly. So I'd have to defer to DNR to speak to that.
Okay, but you do not see a role for the Chesapeake Bay Commission in that ongoing conversation?
There's always a role for the commission in the conversation about the future of our living resources when it comes to the bay. I just would not want to offer an opinion with what I know at the current moment.
Mr. Huffman?
I'd only add that our members over the last 5 or so years have passed a number of major pieces of legislation. Senator Elfreth, now Congresswoman, passed 2 major oyster-related bills within the past 5 years that have, with the goal of increasing shell. That's obviously, we know that's one of the key limiting resources. So there's a lot that the commission members have been doing, on the oyster front, in addition to the 5 sanctuaries where we've had such tremendous success.
So since we're failing on these other sanctuaries, I think we would want a partnership with your commission.
Proved, Senator, is that when we devote the resources, we can accomplish the goal. But we just, quite frankly, don't have the resources to put that level of effort into all the sanctuaries at this point in time.
And I would just ask if you could take a look at that report. Thank you.
Certainly, Senator.
Okay, thank you for your testimony and that presentation. We're going to next move. We've got 3 cabinet secretaries. I do want to get them up here sitting patiently in the front row. We've got Secretary McElwain, our Maryland Department of the Environment Secretary. We've got Kevin Addick, Secretary of Agriculture, and Josh Kurtz, Secretary of Department of Natural Resources. So between the 3 cabinet secretaries, who wants to go first? And you guys compared notes, Kevin, in terms of dress. I mean, like, it's kind of interesting. Yeah. Okay.
Maybe I should get in the middle with my tan.
There you go.
Break it up a little bit.
Break it up a little bit.
Okay. Who's going to lead? Secretary Kurtz.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair, and members of the committee. Thank you for the time today. For the record, Secretary Kurtz, Department of Natural Resources. I'm joined by my 2 colleagues. And so we're going to kind of go a little bit of DNR, a little bit of MDA, a little bit of MDE, and talk about the Chesapeake Bay, the progress we've made, where we're going as a state. I think as you just heard by the Chesapeake Bay Commission and the presentation about the Bay program, we're at a fundamentally important moment. We're at an inflection point in terms of the Chesapeake Bay restoration. And we have 2 critically important things that are going to allow us to move forward and to be successful long term. One is a strong partnership regionally in the state of Maryland with a multitude of stakeholders. And number 2 is really sound science and science that has evolved over the past couple years. And we're looking forward to talking through with you some of those fundamental pieces of science that are allowing us to make better management decisions in real time and really spread the benefits around to all of our constituents from the work that we're doing. And I am going to, all right, there we go. Right. So just very briefly, as you heard, this goes back to 1983. We've started this with a multitude of agreements. We're currently under the 2014 agreement. And frankly, that was an incredibly strong agreement. And one of the things that the 2014 agreement did that other agreements had not had before was an adaptive management component. That adaptive management component created processes that allowed us to evaluate our metrics on the fly, allowed us to make changes to the program, and I think really formed a very strong core when it came to our actual processes as a partnership. There is obviously room for growth because we've not met all those goals, though. And so what we're doing now is, as Director Killia spoke about, is doing that level of deep analysis of those outcomes, of those goals, and then talking about the broader agreement, which really is that framework for how we partner with our sister jurisdictions, the federal government and the Chesapeake Bay Commission. And so when you look at the agreement and what's going on, I think an important component to this is that Governor Moore is currently the chair. This is the 2nd year in a row that Maryland has been the lead for the Chesapeake Bay program. And at such an important time, we feel that that's very important. It allows us to really help set agenda, work really collaboratively across the states, and figure out where we have opportunities to export success and import success. One thing that I'm very proud of being a Marylander is that when you look at the programs in other states that Director Killius mentioned, those they learned about and brought from Maryland, right? The Maryland Agricultural Cost Share Program, which you'll hear about, the Bay Restoration Fund. We have been the innovation hub, and we need to continue to be the innovation hub if we're going to be successful across all of these jurisdictions. So I wanted to also just talk briefly then about what we're doing here in Maryland. So when the governor took office, he created the Council on Chesapeake and Coastal Bays Watershed. And I think that's really important because it links our Chesapeake Bay work, our water quality work with what we're doing in the coastal bays. It allows us to really focus in our freshwater areas and understand where those intersectionality points can be optimized to have greater success. We work very collaboratively and closely with several state agencies that impact water quality in this space. It allows us to coordinate funding, allows us to coordinate programming. I think it's kind of the 2.0 version of the Chesapeake Bay Council that was in existence before. And we're really excited to talk to you now about some of those spaces where we've been able to optimize funding and optimize programming to get better rate of return and better outcomes for Marylanders. And so I wanted to start with just a very quick look back at the last time we presented you water quality monitoring data. And what you see on the screen here, the green dots are where it has improved over time. The red dot is where it is degraded over time, and the gray dot is no trend. And I show you this so that I can show you the next slide, which looks a lot better. And because what we are seeing is improvement in many of these spaces. Many of the areas that were degraded are now holding the line. Many of those areas that were holding the line have now flipped to green. And what's important to note here is this is actually monitored water quality. This is what we see on the ground. And that's very important because the basis of our partnership is a model. And so what we are seeing on the ground is what we would expect to see in the model, things improving. As was touched upon, I would call your attention to that northern part of the bay. The Harford County, Cecil County, Baltimore County areas, we have seen increases there in water quality improvement. And I think what we are seeing is on the ground understanding linking with the model. And just to show the model, this is what we are seeing in terms of what the modeled outcomes would be. We are on track for almost all of our goals related to water quality. And I know Secretary McElwain will discuss this, but you can see that blip where our wastewater treatment plants came offline. But MDE has been able to correct that and bring that down below where we expected in the model. So I wanted to touch on a couple things between 2010 and 2023 to give you an idea of where we're making progress. It's pretty much everywhere across the board. What you'll see is that agricultural number, which is still rather large, has not gone down as much. We understand why that is now, and I think that's really centrally important to our ability to manage in the Bay. And that is from the CESAR report. So the comprehensive evaluation of system response is an absolutely fundamental piece of science that looked at and evaluated, I think it was over 60 scientists from multiple states evaluated what's going on in the watershed. And they learned a lot and allowed us to really focus in on where do we need to better target these interventions? How do we get people excited about this? We need to be in our nearshore areas. We need to focus on how our best management practices work together, not think about them as one-offs. And I think what is really important is it helped us better understand time lags. So in the agricultural space, what we are seeing is farmers from an implementation perspective meeting the goals where we want to see. Voluntary programs, whether these be forested buffers, cover crops, a wide range of spaces, but we weren't seeing the actual monitored number of nitrogen and phosphorus go down. Well, it's actually pretty simple. When you plant something, if you think about having a garden at your house, when you plant something, you don't plant it, water it once, and then come back and harvest the fruit. You have to wait. And those plants, because they're natural filters, over time they become more and more effective. And so what we're going to continue to see is the payoff of these investments from even a decade ago starting to continue to improve our water quality. Another area where I think we're very excited is the whole Watershed Act, and I want to thank you all for the leadership and the partnership on this. We've had 9 applications for the first round of funding. This is directly related to CESAR. We are going to focus in these watersheds, not just thinking about jurisdictional issues, but cross-boundary issues, how these best management practices work together, and build strong partnerships on the ground. We know strong partnerships work at the highest levels of government to ensure that this work is done. We need to build stronger partnerships in our communities to be able to deliver that as well. Touching on 5 million trees. Trees are critically important for us, and we had come a little bit off of schedule for the planting, but we're really excited. We went 111% over the first 2 years of tree planting in this previous year. We focused on building those partnerships, ensuring that we have institutional kind of partners that can really do a lot more tree planting. We've been able to up that pace, which is critically important for our water quality. And at DNR, we're managing the Atlantic and Coastal Bays Trust Fund. This is put on the ground over 3,400 projects that directly relate to water quality improvements, which you can see on the right, including over 5 million pounds of nitrogen reduced. And I'll turn it over to my colleague, Secretary Addicks. Appreciate that.
Before we do that pivot, Vice Chair Kagan had a question, Secretary Kurtz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Secretary Kurtz, thank you. And I just tweeted, it's such a thrill to have 3 cabinet secretaries here, and I think it really reflects beautifully on the priority that the Chesapeake Bay and the whole environment is for the Moore-Miller administration. So kudos to you and to them. My question, and again, another PowerPoint without page numbers. So if we can go back to the, noted, right?
Yep.
The pretty map that we don't have in color. Thank you. Yes, that's it. Secretary Kurtz, you referenced partnerships, and I wonder if you could say more. Is that, I assume it's counties, is that municipalities, is it nonprofits? Like, who else are you working with, if you
Yeah,
would?
so the whole Watershed Act, what's really fundamentally important about this is that we are not picking the watersheds. We're setting criteria for what we want to see, and then we are relying on nonprofits, local governments, academia to build very robust partnerships. And so what's reflected in all 9 of these are partnerships that have support from local governments, so municipal and county leaders. They have, most of them have either nonprofit or academic partners and private landowners as partners too. Okay. And so what we're trying to ensure is that we're helping kind of generate and incentivize the creation of those partnerships that are going to get us a better rate of return from a cost benefit perspective, but also get more people engaged in the work. And we're, I think, really excited about the 9. The decision to get that down to 5 is going to be really difficult.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Senator Gallion, then we'll go to Senator Cruz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hello, all secretaries. Follow up on your slide about the 2021 results for the water quality, and then moving forward, I noticed there was improvement there at the Conowingo Dam. Do you attribute to that to, earlier we heard from the Chesapeake Bay Commission about Pennsylvania's improved a lot. Do you think that is that the reason for that improvement? Because there's still all that silt right behind the dam that every time they have to open the gates is coming through and heading down. So I was just pleasantly surprised to hear there was improvement, but I was just curious as to where you thought that improvement was coming from.
So when we look at the UMC's report card, which we can share around, what we do see is a significant amount of improvement because of investments Pennsylvania has made upstream in the Susquehanna. And so those directly align. We also have and Madam Secretary would probably be better to speak about this than I am, but the partnership with the Susquehanna River Basin Commission up there to be able to do more best management practices as well. So I think it's multifold, but the investments in Pennsylvania, especially in the ag space, have been really beneficial for us.
Okay, thank you. And one other question on the 5 million trees. I know when we were talking about this years ago when it was passed, it was brought up the importance of tree maintenance, because I think in previous tree plantings, we had a lot of issue with they weren't maintained, and you had all this weed seed blowing everywhere. So is the maintenance program, is that staying on point, and is that being effective like we
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what we're seeing is because partners that apply for the funding can actually include funding for those maintenance programs. It's allowed us to be far more successful. And we're seeing that in the ag space, suburban space, and the rural space, or in the urban space, where it's site preparation, it's how do we help account for deer browse, things like that. But I think that's one of the main reasons we've seen greater success over the past couple of years, and in this program specifically.
Senator Cruz, is your question specific for Secretary Kurtz, or should we let the other 2 secretaries?
For Secretary Kurtz.
Okay. Go on.
I want to thank all 3 cabinet secretaries for being here today. I especially want to thank Secretary Adams and Secretary Kurtz
for prioritizing Maryland's avian flu response. I know you're spending a lot of time, hours, and that's very much appreciated across the board. My 2 quick questions for Secretary Kurtz. One would be, when we went through moving forward with the whole Watershed Act of 2024, you'll recall we had a conversation to make sure the coastal bays were included, and it was. And, obviously I see that they've moved forward with an application, so if there's any comment on that. And then 2, the question I asked earlier, you and I and the chairman of the Watermen's Caucus in the past have had conversations about rotational harvesting in light of these sanctuaries that have been failing. I know that those are ongoing conversations, but if you wanted to comment on that, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Absolutely, happy to. And so I think there's a couple things that points that I think are important to make. One is the importance of scale in our sanctuary restoration. The 5 that we discussed that are part of the BAKE program are tributary scale. And so those were set up in support from our Science and Technical Advisory Commission, or STAC. And so what we did is we brought together a wide range of constituents and agreed on metrics for success. In those the big five, as they're being called, there's 5 in Virginia as well, the Big Ten. We have seen all of those metrics for success been made in terms of oyster density, population size, and that is directly attributable to the investment we've made in those sanctuaries. The other sanctuaries that you referred to, they are in a wide range of different health, and that's determined by different components, whether that be water quality, whether that be ongoing issues with underwater grasses, things that are disrupting the habitat. And so the report that you referenced from Talbot County Watermen's Association was an analysis of our report. And that report has allowed us to look back and say, okay, where are there sanctuaries that are not doing well? And what can we do to change that? Do they need investments in mulch, so that hard bottom, so that we can start reestablishing oysters in those spaces? We're looking at some really innovative opportunities with kind of clam rigs to be able to clean up some of those oyster shells so that they're able to catch a spat. I think the difficult thing to comment on here is that each one of those, since we analyzed each one of those sanctuaries, each one had different factors that contributed to either its success, the fact that it's middling, or the fact that it's failed. So I'd be happy to provide much greater detail from that report, so we could have a conversation about each one of those sanctuaries. But I think it's hard to categorize because salinity plays a role in that, prevalence of disease plays a role in that, the availability of shell. So there's a multitude of reasons that the sanctuaries are doing differently in terms of success. Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, yes, and the whole watershed, yeah. Again, another opportunity, and I think another space where we've seen a very robust partnership, whether it be county, we have county and municipal letters of support there. It's run by a nonprofit, but they're also working really closely with academic institutions and really looking at how are we as Marylanders being impacted by pollution sources in Delaware as well? So I think that's another strength of their application, is that cross-jurisdictional, the cross-jurisdictional nature of it.
Okay, Senator Washington.
Thank you, and thank you, all 3 of you, for what you do. I just have a question about you mentioned about the leadership and the different commissions. So, and you all are listed. These all appear on DNR's website. And so we have the Governor's Executive Council, I guess, on the Bay. And then there's the Governor's Council on the Chesapeake Bay. And then we have the Critical Area Commission for the Chesapeake and Atlantic Coastal Bays. And then we have the committee on the Joint Committee on the Chesapeake and Atlantic Coastal Bays and Critical Areas. Mm-hmm. So just wondering how they all relate. I ask because I'm the new chair of the Committee on the Chesapeake and Atlantic Coastal Bays Committee, the joint chair. So how did these 3 work together?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the key piece is ensuring that they do, right? Because when you look at, the Critical Area Commission, that's focused on, that area directly adjacent to the water. And you need to make different management decisions in that space. And the commission is really strong because it is a locally driven partnership. So we have representatives from local government that sit within the commission, work with the commission staff to be able to ensure we're making management decisions there and permitting decisions there that benefit the development for those jurisdictions while also benefiting water quality. So important that we are, working closely with the Critical Area Commission, sharing science, sharing resources. At the end of the day, all of these commissions are relying on good data and good information for us to make management decisions. And I think that gets back to why it's so important to have a really robust partnership with groups like UMCES. We can tap into their water quality monitoring program. Department of Environment does water quality monitoring, so does DNR. So does MDOT, many of our counties. And so all of these commissions really allow us to align and to coalesce around what we're learning. And we're really excited, I think, to reinvigorate some of those spaces through work with like UMCES Collaboratorium and a wide range of other partners and stakeholders. So I think the beauty of having these several and diverse coalitions is being able to bring them together so that we can find those overlapping solutions.
I really commend water assessments, mapping, the work that DNR does to share. And so in terms of particularly in permitting questions and what the Department of Agriculture or DNR uses when they're making decisions about permitting or not permitting or preservation and conservation, does the department, does DNR provide updated maps, or like how does the information flow among? And if it's not quite flowing, I would love an opportunity to talk about that to ensure that decisions are made with the latest science, not maps from 2018 or unmapped, and one map is different than what the federal government says. And so is there any opportunity or mission for these to get together and across agencies use the same map?
Yeah, and I actually think a really important member, of our Watershed Council, who's not here with us right now, but is the Department of Planning. And they do a lot of that centralization for us.
Secretary Flores in the back, so just,
Well, shout out to my colleague. But MDP plays a really important role there in really ensuring that we are all utilizing the best and the most up-to-date maps. Those maps might not be generated by MDP. They might be generated by Department of Environment, Department of Ag, DNR, MDOT, et cetera. But it's great to have that other entity that really helps us ensure that we're aligning across those spaces. And so we talk about that at the Watershed Council, but also at the Sustainable Growth Council as well.
Okay, who is going to go next? Secretary Addicks, and then we'll finish with Secretary McElwain.
Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members experienced and brand new, thank you very much for having us here to talk about something that's critically important, and that is our Chesapeake Bay. You heard reference BMP's best management practices and WIP goals. If you look at this slide, there are two graphs here. The one on the left is Maryland's progress. The one on the right is the whole watershed within the Bay region progress. The bar at the right of each of those graphs is our goal. You can see very clearly that Maryland has met, in many of the cases, the goal, or is very close to meeting in some of the other categories. If you take all of the watershed, combine it together, not including Maryland, there's a lot of work still to do. So as Secretary Kurtz mentioned, we have been leaders and we continue to lead. If you think about the work that we do in the Department of Agriculture, it's not just us, it's partnerships. We've got the soil conservation districts, 24 of them. We work with them. We have our planners on our team. We have folks on our team who are going out to make sure that the best management practices that have been implemented are still working. And we have found that of the 20,000 practices that have been installed, roughly 70% are not only still existing, but are in great effect and continuing to help us meet our goals. If you look at some of these highlights, I won't run through each of these, but you can see that in many cases we are above and beyond our stated goals with forest buffers, cover crops, conservation plans, livestock waste management systems, and of course, wetland restoration. This gives a breakdown of how funding has rolled over the years. I am too old to see the numbers. 2017 and beyond, you can see that we've spent a lot of time focusing on the things that we know work and work really well. Cover crops. We've had our strongest year ever in terms of applications for cover crops. Not only does it help protect the bay, but farmers are realizing that these practices actually help improve quality of soil, help keep water on the farm, and that's helpful in a time of drought. So you can see just the breakdown here. There is increasing demand for our practices over the years, and we are excited to try to meet those goals. That said, we have to start thinking differently. We are in a spot, as Secretary Kurtz mentioned, that we've got this delayed system response. We know that the practices that we've installed over the last 4 decades are working, and we know that they will continue to work. We expect our numbers to grow exponentially over the next few years. But in addition to those practices that we know work, we have to think about new practices. And CSER gave us clearance. Rarely do you have scientific reports that end with, and go try new things. And CSER told us to go try new things. One of those things that we are launching is a new program called Leaders in Environmentally Engaged Farming. I would assume that many of you on this committee know about the LEED building code standard for building green buildings. It is that concept, but for farms. Farms will engage in a various number of practices and will be scored and will receive a LEAF score. And we will have a team of folks who will work with farms on an individual level to make sure that they are engaging not in just the standard conservation programs that we have offered, but new and innovative things that we know not only are good for the watershed, good for the ecosystem, but are good for the community and are good for the industry. So not just soil health and water quality, but climate smart ag, engaging in value-added processing, growing food for food banks. These things all make agriculture stronger, make farmers more resilient, make the industry more resilient and able to be a better partner in conservation long-term. So we're extremely excited about this. This is part of the Governor's Bay Legacy Act, which you will hear Secretary Kurtz mention in a bit. And I will pass this mouse.
Secretary McElwain, you're clean up here.
Good afternoon, Chair Feldman and members of the committee. It's good to see all of you today. For the record, I'm Serena McElwain, Secretary of Maryland's Department of the Environment. I just want to start by saying, yes, we're protecting and restoring the Chesapeake Bay, but we're also growing our economy, and we're making the Bay desirable. And when you make the Bay desirable, you have people who want to be in Maryland. They want to be at the Bay, around the Bay, in the Bay. And so what we're doing, because we are protecting the Bay supports $3.2 billion in the tourism industry. And so I just wanted to make a point that, yes, we're really protecting the environment, but we're also protecting the economy and helping the economy grow. And so I just wanted to make that point. I wanted to share with you just quickly what I've been doing over the last 2 years since I've been here. I have traveled all across Maryland. I visited so many counties and local governments. I've spoke with people, communities and residents so that I can understand some of their challenges firsthand. And I also toured wastewater treatment plants. I walked neighborhoods, and I can personally see the impact that the funding that we're providing, the impact that it's having in counties and local governments. And in fact, this year alone, we're providing $455 million through the revolving fund that we have. Half of that money goes to overburdened communities. At the same time, during some of my visits, I learned some of the problems that some of the smaller communities have who have much smaller budgets. They've described to me how when we're not able to give them funding for infrastructure, for updating wastewater treatment plants, how that impacts, their communities and their counties. And so sometimes what I'm also learning is the funding that we're giving out, some of the counties can't afford the loan repayment. Some of them all of them really want us to have the loan forgiveness for everyone. But I can just clearly see the different impacts that we're having when we're not able to provide funding and when we are. So now I want to talk about quickly the accomplishments that we've realized over the last couple of years and last year. And I do want to just shape this by saying that everything we do it based on 3 priorities. One is reducing pollution, as you all know, at the source. The other is modernizing the stormwater regulations that we have, and of course, strengthening the partnerships that we have. So when we talk about the accomplishments, as we all know, we're graded a lot, consistently by so many different organizations. I think what's most important about those grades is that they show that we are progressing and we are doing better, or if we're not. So I personally appreciate the grades. The Chesapeake Bay earned the highest grade over the last 2 decades. I think that's a testament of all the work and collaboration that we're doing across the states. I also think that most of the success that we are having is really based on the upgrades in the wastewater treatment plants that we are continuing to invest in. And I think we've proven the point that when you invest in those systems, we can reduce nutrient pollution dramatically. And so dramatically. And that's why I really think it's important that, I highlight that. Secretary Kurtz already mentioned the governor's leadership in chairing the Chesapeake Executive Council. I just wanted to highlight why that's really important. alongside what you said as well. It's really important because when the governor is leading at that level, when Maryland is leading like that, we have an ability to direct and really influence how we think about restoring the Bay. And last, I want to mention the biggest accomplishment that I speak about every time I'm here, and that is the implementation of the early warning system that we have. I think it's the best way for us to continue to be proactive in addressing the red flags that we get beforehand. And so when we are alerted early, we're able to work directly with those plants and make sure that they're getting back on track right away. And so some of the problems that we've had that you all are aware of in the past with the wastewater treatment plants, this system is really helpful in ensuring that we don't have those problems anymore. This chart, I think it just says it all. You can clearly see that the nitrogen reductions have declined since 2020. You can see that we're under target levels since 2022. Specifically, we have decreased nitrogen discharges from entering the Bay by half since 2009. So when we're asked the question, which we are often, what is the return on investment for all the things that we're doing, all of our efforts? I think this chart makes it very clear why it's important that we continue to invest. This slide also tells a story about the investments that we're making. Since 2004, we've invested billions of dollars, as you can see here on this slide. We've invested this money in improving wastewater treatment plants. In 2024, we invested $38 million to upgrade plants. And because we know that our permits can really drive improvements, we are adding operations and maintenance into those permits because that is the most important. That was part of the problem when the wastewater treatment plants failed before. We're also conducting way more inspections than we were prior. And we're using technology, we're using data so that we can track performance, and again, so that we can catch some of those problems beforehand. And we're also doing, well, we have a lot more work to do. And I'll just give one example. One area that we need to really think about is some of the wastewater treatment plants need to be upgraded because they're at the end of their life and their useful life. And that's something that we need to address. So there's still much more for us to do. Okay, let's see. All right, as we know, stormwater is the biggest source of pollution. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about that. We are updating our regulations. The current regulations, quite frankly, are just not sufficient. They're not sufficient to account for climate change, all the flooding that we're having, the rain. And so we need to update those regulations. And we're doing that, and we're making really good progress in getting those regulations updated. We're also promoting green infrastructure because we know that we need to do a better job at protecting urban and rural communities. And although we have restored 32,000 football fields worth of land, and that, of course, reduced pollution from the Bay, we have still so much more to do. And I'm pleased to report that we are addressing rural runoff and pollution from stormwater and septic systems. We have upgraded over 16,000 septic systems to higher technology standards. And we're also funding more non-point source reduction projects. My agency, we're also helping farmers. We're providing funding to farmers, particularly those who are doing a really good job at reducing erosion and runoff with their cover crops program, and also ones who are doing a really good job in improving manure storage. We're also investing in stormwater resilience through planting of more trees, which Secretary already mentioned that. And also my colleague at Agriculture, you all are doing a great job in managing pesticide. And last, I want to just give a quick update because I am asked this often. Where are we with settling the water quality certification issue? I just want to say that we have been in mediation for months now. We're making a lot of progress with those negotiations. I really think that, and they've been very productive, and I think that we're on our way to resolution soon. So that's really all I can say because we are still in mediation regarding the water quality certification. So that's it for me. We're open for any questions that you may have.
Take some questions, although I want to acknowledge our state treasurer and my former chair of the House Economic Matters Committee, Derek Davis, is here in the House, taking in Mr. Treasurer. Welcome. Okay, question. We're going to start with Senator Augustine. We'll go to Senator Brooks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Folks, my question for you is about, this is great, we're making this progress. I was literally just in another committee where I heard that federal dollars had just stopped coming for like Medicaid and stopped coming for some of our most, just serious matters. How much have you all experienced that? Are you all seeing that already today where some of these grants, things aren't coming down? And what is the federal portion of where we are as it relates to this progress and and what do we do about that, given the work that you already are doing, and how much is it dependent on the federal government?
I'll answer just a piece of it. So a lot of this is coming down this week and really last week. Just today, we learned that the president has put a hold on grants and funding, and I think that's what you're referring to. So we don't really know what the impact will be. We do know the hold is until February 10th for right now. Yes, we do depend on those federal funds. But we do, as a state, we have funding as well. We have BRF funds, and we match some of the federal funds. Will it have an impact on us? Yes, it will. And I'll let you continue.
Yeah, I think the Secretary covered it very well. I think we've been doing a deep level of analysis for the past year in terms of looking at each one of these fund sources, what they're funding internally at our departments, to come up with plans if these funding freezes become permanent, how we would be able to reallocate internal assets to make sure that we're still getting the progress done. I think, as the Secretary said, the real driver for us from an implementation perspective is state dollars. Mm-hmm. And so we are going to be able to, with our state dollars, continue to drive this work forward. I think that's frankly the brilliance of the special funds that were set up by this body over time, really insulates us from that. But for example, the Bay program, it's $92 million annually across the entire program. That's just one small sliver of the funding that we get across our agencies that help us and contributes to this work. And we're working really closely with our local partners, nonprofits, et cetera, who also access those grants. So the opportunity for this to have a trickle-down effect is significant.
Okay, Senator Brooks.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Madam Secretary. Hey, the Chesapeake Bay watershed spans 6 states. That's you've got Virginia, Pennsylvania, Delaware, West Virginia, and New York and the District of Columbia. Are we getting cooperation from all of those particular states to help?
Yeah, that's a tricky.
Yeah, well, I think, so the great thing about where we're at right now, and I think the Executive Council meeting really demonstrated this, is that there was unanimous support for the Executive Council charge this year. And that charge was reevaluating and optimizing the agreement. It was really focused on building off of the things that have made us successful, like the adaptive management framework we currently have. Now, the question is, we have new administrations in different states, right? So we'll need to see that. But by and large, I think the partnership has been very strong, and I think the Chesapeake Bay Commission plays a really important role in that when we think about also coordinating between Pennsylvania, Virginia, and Maryland at the state legislative level. So I do think, each state has a different perspective, but there are definite values and things we can learn from each one that's going to allow us to be more successful.
Okay, and I guess Governor Moore being the chair of the Executive Council probably helps a little bit too as well.
It does. Absolutely.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, Senator Hester.
Thank you. So my question earlier was on this slide, which I think Secretary Addix talked about, just showing like how we're meeting our goals. And last year, I believe the Chesapeake Bay Foundation was able to provide us with actual numbers for Virginia, DC, Pennsylvania, and Maryland. So like, it'd be super cool to see this chart for the other states as well, just so that
It's
we know
broken
how.
out individually.
Yeah, we know how we're doing compared to the other states. So could you guys maybe collaborate to get us something like that?
Sure.
Thanks.
Okay, any additional questions, final questions? Seeing none, thank you to our illustrious panel of cabinet secretaries. We've got one panel of two to finish out this briefing before we pivot to jam out some bill hearings. We're going to call up from the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, Allison Golden and Matt Stegman. And Allison, do you want, who's going to start?
I'll start.
Okay, Allison, why don't you start, and we'll see where that takes us.
There we are. Thank you, Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. It's a pleasure to be here this afternoon. I'm Allison Colden. I'm the Maryland Executive Director with the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. I'm pleased to be joined by my colleague, Matt Stegman, our Maryland staff attorney. And based on the previous presentations, we will probably be able to roll through some of this pretty quickly and get you all onto your bill hearings. So I want to dive right into some of the progress and some of the challenges, as well as the things this session and going on outside the legislative session that we're most excited about. So first of all, as you heard, Bay Restoration has made a tremendous amount of progress over the last 40+ years, whether it's our recovering seagrasses, our increasing oyster populations, the shrinking dead zone. These are all incredible testaments to the work that has been done. But as you've already heard today, there's plenty of work to do. The diagram you see in front of you now is related specifically to nitrogen. In our most recent evaluation of Maryland's progress on its watershed implementation plan, the EPA noted that the state is 100% on target with respect to reductions of phosphorus and sediment, but we are falling short with respect to nitrogen. This diagram shows the achievement of those nitrogen reductions starting back in 2009, 2010, one of our baseline years. And what you'll see is, although the long-term trend is trending down, which is very positive, it does vary significantly year to year. The other thing that I'd like to point out is it was noted in 2021 and 2022 that there were several spikes in our nitrogen pollution reaching the Chesapeake Bay, which was attributed to malfunctions and noncompliance at the Back River and Patapsco wastewater treatment plants. So although we have made some significant long-term progress, which we are very excited about, this also shows the need for continued maintenance, strong enforcement, and continued investment in areas where we have already made some significant progress. That being said, as has been pointed out previously, we have remaining challenges specifically in the sectors of non-point source pollution. You'll see here that the largest bars remaining in terms of their inputs to the Chesapeake Bay, nitrogen pollution or stormwater and agriculture. I'd like to point out that agriculture being the largest sector is really due to the fact that it remains Maryland's largest land use in the state. And so not only is it one of our biggest challenges, it's also one of our greatest opportunities. We have been and can continue to make farmers our partners in Bay restoration because agriculture represents the most cost-effective means per pound, dollar per pound wise, of achieving nitrogen reductions for the Chesapeake Bay. Stormwater is a little bit of a different story. Based on the changes that we've made, Maryland has made progress in terms of stormwater management and reducing stormwater pollution. But what we are seeing is that the impacts of increased development and climate change are outpacing our efforts, so that, you know, the net progress we have seen from 2009 to 2023 is actually 0%. This is the area where we need a lot of focus moving forward, and although it is a higher price point in terms of price per pound of nitrogen removed, it is one that we will not get over the finish line of Bay restoration goals without addressing both stormwater and agricultural non-point source pollution. So I wanted to move into some concepts and ideas for the legislative session, as well as other policy changes that we are following and excited about with respect to a long-term Bay restoration. As we know, the state's budget outlook is top of mind for everyone, and even more so as the committee has pointed out today with federal changes happening and on the horizon. But I think we want to emphasize the importance of protecting the progress that we've already made. As you saw from that chart with the nitrogen reductions, we have made significant progress, but it can be fragile. The investments that we've made thus far need to be protected to ensure that we don't backslide, making our efforts moving forward even more difficult. With the latest insights from the Bay program, the Caesar report that was referenced earlier, and other analyses, the state can also work to maximize its investments by targeting the right practices in the right places and at the right scale. To ensure that water quality, habitat, and living resources all benefit the state in a way that stretches each dollar even more than before. And protecting our progress also means that investments in clean water, clean air, and a healthy environment will help us achieve multiple goals that are top of mind for the state, from improved health outcomes, climate mitigation, improved access to green space, and economic stability. So how do we get there? What are the policy levers that we have to pull in this session and in others? First, we are highlighting here the Leaders in Environmentally Engaged Farming, the LEAF program that was introduced by Secretary Addix. It works to prioritize high-value conservation practices by creating tiered incentives for farmers to move more towards those high-value conservation practices and putting them in the right places, and providing incentives that really work for farmers. So this is a way to create a program where we get the greatest possible conservation benefit while making sure that it economically supports Maryland farmers in a way that makes them want to participate in bay restoration. Also recognizing the DNR as one of the largest agricultural landowners in the state, the Governor's Bay Legacy Act also includes provisions that promote soil health and regenerative agricultural practices on state-owned lands. And lastly, the Nearshore Farm and Finance Act, which we hope you all will be seeing soon, is a piece of legislation that recognizes the critical importance of vegetated buffers along tidal waters. These buffer areas of our last line of defense between agricultural runoff and the bay. They're also the areas that are most susceptible to flooding, saltwater intrusion, and shoreline erosion. So by reducing nutrient application in these areas and further incentivizing buffer establishment, we can help improve water quality and protect farms from the growing threats of climate change. Outside of the legislative session, there's some significant changes and benefits that can be made. And first, in terms of reforming stormwater permitting, as was addressed by Secretary McElwain, this is critical to ensuring the realities of climate change are accounted for and addressed through our stormwater permitting system. That includes using the most up-to-date rainfall data, managing water volume in addition to water quality, and requiring real impervious acreage reduction as opposed to check-the-box credits that don't actually address the root cause of our stormwater and flooding issues. Also highlighting here, as we've highlighted before, the whole Watershed Act implementation and the 5 Million Trees initiative established by Tree Solutions Now Act. These will make significant progress in localized areas where coordinated watershed plantings and planning and tree plantings occur. And lastly, I want to emphasize continued enforcement. The laws passed in this chamber over the years have brought us this far in the progress that has been made in bay restoration, but without proper enforcement, they're just words on paper. And so by ensuring developers, industrial sites, and other regulated entities are in compliance with stormwater and discharge permits, that will be a critical ongoing necessity in achieving our bay restoration goals. So I'll wrap up there and say that overall, Maryland and the Bay Program Partnership have made meaningful progress. Looking forward, the next chapter, specifically addressing non-point source pollution, will be challenging, but we think achievable. And with science-driven approaches and the wisdom of 40 years of restoration behind us, we can maximize the benefit of this work for all Marylanders. So I'll wrap it up there and at the chair's discretion, take any questions.
Okay,
Thanks.
we'll take some questions. We're going to start with Senator Hester.
Thank you. Just going back to the stormwater thing, I've asked a number of questions over the years about updating our flooding maps. Like, are those, what would we be using the old maps and the old, like would we need to do that at all to update the stormwater management regs?
Do you want to take that?
Yeah. So there's a ongoing process. The MDE might be better equipped to speak to it in detail, but there's been an ongoing process called the A-Storm process, updating the data that goes into the stormwater management and sort of the standards that go into designing, things like, sewer outfalls and things like that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Senator Washington.
Thank you, and we're going to tag team, Mr. Chair, on this question. And perhaps we will bring the department back. So does the trust receive, or have you had an opportunity to receive the results? I mean, the storm report came out in '21, right? And we haven't really seen anything from the department in regard to implementing the recommendations. And in fact, after interviewing people, Mr. Chair, that all of our farmers and our constituents and the people interested in this have really asked the state to take a lead, right? And it feels that we need to establish updated regulations and regarding specifically flooding and stormwater. So have you had an opportunity to view any of the status or have heard anything or gotten a report?
Yeah, so again, that's been an ongoing process. One of our colleagues, Doug Myers, who was well-known to members of this committee, had been on the advisory organization that was working with the department on that. There was an update, I believe, in October. Again, I think the agency could give you more detail on that, but yes, that's a process that we've been participating in, but as advocates, we want to push them to do it as quickly as possible.
And just as a follow-up, would it surprise you to know that the department is using 2018 maps and data when it comes to identifying floodplains or tributaries? Or, in fact, DNR has an updated map, but are those maps being actually used in the permitting process? Well, you can say, I have to ask the secretary about that.
Yeah, again, I think you may need to ask the
fine.
secretary.
I mean,
Can I say that is the case? I can't tell you for certain. Would it surprise us? Not necessarily.
Right, okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, I mean, we talking Secretary McElwain? I mean, I'm kind of reluctant to bring her back up unless do you want me to bring her? Okay, okay. Any additional questions? Okay, seeing none, that concludes our briefing on Chesapeake Bay restoration briefing. We need to take a 5-minute break before we, again, jam out some bill hearings, and then we'll be done for the day. So 5-minute break so we can reboot the computer streaming, okay? 5 minutes.